Myself again. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much again for coming and joining us today for the Nile Talk webinar. Today's is a little bit unique, particularly we have never done that before. It's going to be a 4-members panel discussing about data sharing and information exchange, particularly in the face of the upcoming GERD operations and management. As you know, we have done 2 fillings and then more fillings to come, and then at the same time also parallel operation of the GERD is going to happen. So when this happens, what level of collaborations or what types of information data exchange has to happen between the GERD operators, Ethiopia, and also Sudan and Egypt. And this is really very important. It might have been sidelined by the politicians and by some people in these countries, but it is really becoming very, very important to talk about it, particularly for future collaborations. So let me go back a little bit. This is a monthly webinar series that is led by the FIU's Institute of Environment, where myself and Candice are actually part, and also co-organized by Addis Ababa Institute of Technology, Partner Institute of Technology in Ethiopia, and also the Water and Land Center at Addis Ababa University, and the Nile Basin Discourse, which has been very collaborative with us on this. So again, this is mainly to talk about science, data, and how we can actually entertain different points of views when it comes to understanding the whole Nile Basin and the whole transboundary water management issues, particularly in the Nile. So I will introduce each of our panel members who have been very gracious enough to actually give their time to come and talk about today. But generally, it is all about data sharing and information exchange in the face of upcoming GERD operations and management. Traditionally, you might have seen that data sharing and information exchange is really relatively poor in the Nile Basin countries, even though there has been an immense pressure and effort in order to actually exchange data and work together. I personally believe it has never been raised to a point where it has to be, and we know that because of that, the collaborations and talking to each other has been an issue. So this is really very important. So I have brought today Dr. Wossenu Abtew, Dr. Alem Gebriel, Mr. Mohammed Bashir, and also Dr. Kevin Wheeler from University of Oxford. I will introduce each one of them briefly. So the topics that I really somehow suggested in consultation with the panel members is what can we do in the area of climate predictions and weather forecasting, particularly in terms of making available this data for the Nile Basin countries, particularly the scientific community outside the basin countries can have access and also capability to provide these types of information. So even though it's a larger scale, maybe there has to be some way of actually using these types of data. Another very important aspect is the reservoir management and modeling framework. What type of frameworks it has to be? How can we exchange data along this line, particularly for managing the different numbers of reservoirs that we have. We have GERD, we have also HAD, and also we have a number of reservoirs and dams in Sudan, and all of them are actually operating at the same time. So what type of information exchange it has to be, and how can they work together? Another very important is flow prediction and reservoir filling. So there are models, there are simulations that needs to be done, particularly since data availability is very limited. So how can we make these types of information available again for the basin countries? And then another very important thing, particularly when it comes to Sudan's dams, is reservoir operation planning and data exchange. As you might have heard, Sudan has experienced some floods this rainy season. So what happened and what should have been done is maybe something an important thing to look into. And then we have invited particularly Mohammed and Kevin, who has worked on these areas to shed some light. And then another is the data exchange, the DSS for data exchange. This is really very important. The Nile Basin has a bigger directorate to work under this. And one of the important aspects of this particular directorate was actually trying to make data available. So this is for decision support system. You need to provide data, synthesize information, and of course available it for whoever to use it. But based on my experience and also talk with the Nile Basin people, this has never been where it has to be. There has been not a positive experience in terms of data exchange for a number of reasons. So the question is, how can you depoliticize data exchange and also data sharing? As you know, in the Western countries, particularly in the state where I live here, data is a public good. So particularly if data is collected using public resource or a taxpayer's money, then data should actually be exchanged without any problem. I can just walk into any state organization and ask for data. Of course, there has to be some limitations, but that has never been the case in Ethiopia, and I believe also in Sudan and also in other countries, particularly not only within, but also data exchange across the boundaries. So with that, let me introduce panel members. Kevin Wheeler, Dr. Kevin Wheeler, you know him before. He's not unique. He's not new to our panel. He has been a keynote speaker for our last summer conference on the Nile, and also he has been also to our forum a few times. Kevin is from the University of Oxford. He is an Oxford Martin Fellow. He has done a number of work in different parts of the world, particularly when it comes to transboundary water management. He has done some work in the Nile and also here in North America. He is an environmental change institute. He's at the Environmental Institute of the University of Oxford. His PhD is in transboundary water management. He has over 15 years of experience in water resource planning and engineering. And I believe Kevin is currently here also for a similar type of assignment to work, hopefully in the Colorado River. And I believe maybe Kevin, you can correct me later on. He has worked on development and application of decision support systems for both long-term water resource planning and management. And he has been very active, particularly in the model development and stakeholder training in the Eastern Nile region. Thank you very much, Kevin, for accepting my invitation. And Dr. Wossenu Abtew, again, you know him. He's a colleague that I know him for over 20 years. Dr. Wossenu just retired a couple of years ago from the South Florida Water Management District. He's a principal engineer who had worked a lot in the Nile River Basin, also in the South Florida Water Management District. So Wossen is a professional civil engineer and also water resource engineer, certified by the American Academy of Water Resource Engineers. He worked as a principal engineer at South Florida Water Management District for close to 30 years before retiring. Currently, he is a consultant in water resource and environmental area. His experience includes hydrology, water management, environmental restoration, reservoir sizing, and operation in the Nile River Basin and the GERD. He has published a book on GERD and also other books on the Nile Basin, evapotranspiration, extreme hydrology, and landscape dynamics. There is also a book that will be released anytime in a couple of days, which is a result of our 2020 the Nile and the GERD conference. And he is a co-editor on that one. And also Wossen has published a number of articles in peer-reviewed journals. Alem Gebriel, again, he is not also new to our forum. He has been a few times, and Alem is a principal engineer and also water resource technical director at WSP. And he has a civil engineering PhD from Texas Tech University in 1994, MS from Iowa State 1990, and basic agricultural engineering at Addis Ababa University in 1984. He is a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers, also member of the Texas Floodplain Managers, and as a registered engineer in Texas, he has done a lot of work. Over 30 years of experience in water resource planning, hydrology and hydraulics, infrastructure planning, water supply and distributions, wastewater collections, quite a lot. And also on the side, Alem has been very active, particularly in providing seminars and also talks, particularly on the GERD situations, different modeling work that he has done as part of his side work. Mohammed Bashir, again, Mohammed is a very active PhD student that I have ever known, and I'm very happy to know him. He has never said no whenever I ask him to come and talk and be part of our webinar. Mohammed is a PhD student from the University of Manchester, so he has done a lot of work when it comes to GERD and also flood issues. And then today here, he is with us. Mohammed is a doctoral researcher at the University of Manchester. His doctoral research focuses on economics of engineered water systems, focusing on the Nile Basin. He has a BSc in civil engineering from the University of Khartoum and master's in IWRM from Cologne University of Applied Sciences. Mohammed has been involved in contributing to water-related research and consultancy projects in a variety of regions around the world, including Northwest and East Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East. Over the past 5 years, Mohammed co-authored and published several scientific papers in international peer-reviewed journals on the Nile water management. I believe Mohammed will be graduating anytime soon, and he has been a very resourceful person when it comes to providing information, particularly on the Sudanese aspect of the GERD and the Nile. When it comes to moderators, I will be moderating this panel discussion along with Dr. Abdulkarim Said, who I heard that now he's a regional director of IMI, the International Water Management Institute, stationed in Addis. He has left NBI about 5 months ago. I was talking to him a few days ago. He has another very pressing meeting now, but he will join us a little bit later, so he will be part of these discussions. Abdulkarim has led the decision support system of NBI for a long time, and he knows what it means when it comes to data sharing, data exchange. So he will be part of our moderators. Let me say a few things about upcoming webinars, a couple of them. In September, our own Magdalite Masai will talk about evaluating international transboundary water management practice for the contextual lessons for the Nile Basin. So there are a number of basins that have transboundary water resources, but how can they really, how did they do it in terms of coexisting together, collaborating together, working together, but also sharing the common good. So experience will be drawn from all these transboundary water basins, and it will be presented by Magdalite. Magdalite is, of course, a doctoral student in our department. And then Dr. Assad Shamteddin, he's an associate professor from the University of Auckland, New Zealand, originally from Sudan. So he was very generous in order to actually give a seminar, particularly on the GERD, underreported issues of GERD impacts on Sudan. So he wants particularly to see some of the impacts from his point of view that GERD will actually bring about to Sudan, whether it's actually flood or maybe environment or maybe any other issues. He will be presenting on October 8th from New Zealand, and please join us. So a few reminders again, as I always say, this will be recorded, so please be aware, and please mute your microphone for the duration of the presentations. And then once the panel discussions, the 4 presenters would actually give an overview of about 5 to 10 minutes, and then once they're done, and then it will be open for Q&A, where you'll be allowed to raise your hand or maybe send your questions and comments through a chat, and then I will be going from there. So now I will ask now each panel members to talk about. It can be on slides, it can be on orally, doesn't matter, but give about 5 to 10 minutes of talk on the topics that they have selected. So now I will start with Dr. Abtew.
Okay, share the screen, please.
Okay, you can share your screen, Wossenu, now.
Do you see it?
Not yet. You are a co-host, you can co-share, yeah.
See.
Or if you can email me, I can share it from here if you want.
I just send it.
Okay. I still don't see it.
I just sent you the email.
Yeah, okay. So I'm checking both of my emails. I don't see it anywhere.
It is FIU.
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah. I don't see it. Yeah. Okay, I still don't see it, Wassem. Hopefully it will come soon. But for the sake of time, let's go to Mohammed. Mohammed?
Hi, thanks. I'll try sharing my screen. I hope it works.
Okay.
Did it come on?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for organizing this interesting discussion. I just want to show like a few slides just as a starter for the discussion later on. We'll not really go into detail. Hopefully we'll finish this in less than 5 minutes. But before I start, I just want to say that I do not represent the Sudanese government. I'm just here to show some of my own research work, which might or might not align with the views of the Sudanese government. Just looking at this slide, it shows us the historical hydrology of the Nile. So looking at it, there are two main characteristics that are present in the Nile hydrology. So variability from one year to another, and then also variability from the same year. So if you look at the plot on the top, it shows the standardized stream flow index, basically showing when the flows were above or below normal. And we can see that there is an alternating pattern between above and below normal years, but this variability has been increasing in the past few decades. And if we also look at the flow within the year, we can see that most of the flow happens in 4 months, but there's also high variability in terms of flow. So in some years we have very high flows that almost, I mean, that's the Blue Nile at a dam gauge, that's which is pretty much the inflow to the GERD now. So it reaches almost near the 1 billion, and I think it had exceeded that last year. So we have this variability, which is also very challenging and requires careful monitoring and data exchange. But also, if you look a little bit into the future and try to look at some projections for how climate change is going to impact the Blue Nile flow at the GERD location. So this is the inflow at the GERD, and this is here based on climate projections and climate simulations from CMIP6. And these are like 29 projections. But what we can see from these projections is that there is a pretty wide range. What we see in this figure is the annual flow of the Blue Nile at the GERD location, and there is high variability. Some projections show really high flows, some projections show very low flows. But also, if we look at the average inflow over the years for each of the projections, and to try to plot that actually in a box plot, so we can see that also the average annual flow is quite variable. We can see that some projections show that the average annual flow would stay around the 50 billion of the past. Some others show that it's going to increase quite drastically. Some others show that it's going to be decreasing quite much. So what I really take from this kind of simulations, from this figure specifically, that we really don't know much about the future. We know very little. We know that there is going to be high variability, and we know very little about how climate change is really going to impact the Blue Nile flow. So what this means is that our management practices and our management plans need to be adaptive, and we need to be able to monitor these changes and make the data available for everyone to develop their adaptive plans as the future unfolds. So this map here shows the location of the GERD and the Osiris Dam, and the one here on the left side specifically shows the GERD reservoir and the Osiris reservoir, and it shows how close they are. So the distance between the GERD dam and the tail of the Osiris reservoir is something between 15 and 20 kilometers, which is a very, very short distance and requires extremely careful coordination and data exchange between the operators of the two dams, and basically operation in consultation with each other, because that will be required in order to avoid either floods and destruction or droughts. And here, this is just some cubes that kind of visualize the sizes of different reservoirs of the dams, and we can see that the GERD is quite large compared to the Osiris. The last slide I want to show today is that most discussion have been focusing on the issue of drought and how droughts are difficult to manage, and I think most of the negotiations have been really designed around that. But what I want to highlight here as well is that even based on the historical hydrology, which will change in the future and will have increasing variability in the Blue Nile flows, even with that, we can see that the GERD cannot eliminate the floods downstream. So we, for example, in here, this plot, the lower plot here showed the outflow from the GERD, which for large parts, it could be quite regular because it targets generating hydropower. But when the GERD reservoir reaches high levels, then the risk of having high outflows, because the GERD needs to spill more water, increases, and that requires careful coordination with downstream reservoirs, and perhaps even that there comes the importance of inflow forecasting, because at the beginning of the year, if you are at a high level, you could try to draw down the reservoir to make some space for incoming inflows to kind of try to reduce the high outflows from the dam. But also these forecasts need to be quite reliable, because otherwise you could draw down the reservoir volume and not be able to recover it if the forecast doesn't come to be true. So that's also a very important aspect. Inflow forecast is a very important issue that need to be considered. I'll leave it here, and I'm happy to discuss further later on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. So we're going to wait until everybody presents, and then we'll open the floor for discussions. Now, I'm going to invite Wossenu. So let me share his presentations. Now I have it. So. Okay, can you see Wossenu?
Yeah.
Okay, you can go ahead.
All right. Okay. My topic is in-series reservoir operations, the need for data sharing and cooperation. If you operate reservoirs in series, like the GERD and then the Osiris, and the different sizes of dam downstream, there is a need to share information in many areas. One is climate forecast upstream of the GERD, and on the Sudan itself, weather forecast, the same thing. And hydrologic projection modeling has to be done. That's using all these variables, how much inflow is expected into the GERD, what will be the water level downstream, and then all this information has to be coordinated. And advanced reservoir management decision-making is required after this dam is built. Also, the reservoirs sizes are very important. For example, Osiris is 1/10 of the GERD. It needs information for its critical operation decision making. And Sudan downstream of the GERD is a floodplain area, and which requires sensitive water management as long as development increases, and there will be more the probability is high for frequent flooding. So that is important for information sharing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss my experience in South Florida in water management and reservoir management with information sharing. The next slide, please. This is the hydraulic profile of South Florida, about 400 kilometers. And we have a lot of lakes and canals, pumps, water control structures. It is a floodplain or a wetland. The only way people can reside here is by carefully moving water and by carefully managing our reservoir. As you can see, here we have lakes. All the lakes have gate structure like reservoir. And Lake Okeechobee is the size of GERD, the surface area. And we have 3 impoundments, water conservation area, 1, 2, and 3. Total area is twice as much as the GERD. So the way this delicate water management is done by sharing information from top to bottom is, here I have a chart, which is from, I have the reference on the left side, our South Florida water management. The topic we are discussing is published in a chapter over there. What we do when I was there as part of this team, every week, a team of meteorologists, climatologists, modelers, ecologists, and all kinds of expertise gather and see weather forecast, climate forecast for the year, weather forecast for week, 3 months, all kinds of levels. And there are modelers who come with projection where water level will be if certain kind of weather patterns persist. And advice is passed to the decision makers like this on a weekly basis. And this is one of the most advanced water management system in the world. Next slide, please. With all this, there was a drought in 2011 where wetlands, impoundments were dry. And if you go back, evaluate the decisions, releases were made from the reservoirs earlier, anticipating wet conditions. So you can see that decisions can result in extreme conditions. And the lower one is the flooding. This was during the tropical system, and a lot of the area was flooded. So this is to show that even with the most advanced water management or reservoir management system, the weather, the climate controls what is going to happen. That's why you can't have legally binding agreement on a reservoir operation. Too many variables in decision making to cover in a legal document. No legal binding agreement should ever be discussed by politicians, yes, but people who have operated reservoirs, you won't find anybody who will take the risk to make on a stochastic decision on probabilistic outcomes, water management decision. And also deviations from Mohammed's presentation, you have seen that when the GERD is high, the chance of releasing more downstream. So Sudan can request Ethiopia that there is flash flood in Khartoum if they can hold back water in GERD outside the guideline. If you sign up some, even if you agree on some guidelines, deviations are needed for cooperation. This is after sharing information, doing everything else. So there, you can't cover all that in documents. And also the drought mitigation part is in the legally binding part. Drought mitigation in the Eastern Nile has to consider all the reservoirs from Assad, where most of the water is stored. And that's to address drought problem, not by creating some legal documents are only if they or if you have to determine how much water Ethiopia has to release to downstream. So reservoir operation is hit and miss decision making. Overall, what the Eastern Nile with additional dams needs is massive water management system where modeling, hydrologic prediction, estimation, and decision making. So information sharing and modeling is a system is very important. So especially on Sudan's part, to control flooding, I think it has to develop its water management decision-making process, and the same for everybody. This is what I have, and we'll cover other.
Okay, thank you, Wasan. So now let's go to Alem.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, do you want to share?
Sure.
Or you want me to do it from here?
Yeah, let me share.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Yeah, yes, Alem, can see it.
Okay. Can you see now? I just changed the screen, correct?
Yeah, if you can
Okay.
go to, now we see your presentation, your presenter window. If you go to display setting and then maybe you're gonna change.
Display setting and do what?
Swap presentation view. Yeah, let me see.
Okay, what about now?
Yeah, it's good now.
Okay, good. I think I'll skip this slide. I mean, the title and today's topic is discussed by Dr. Asafa. I'll focus on 4 topics: data collection, weather forecasting, flow prediction, and the exchange part from. I'll introduce a few of my own experience on data sharing, web-based, which I would like the system to go in that direction, even though it might take us several years to go there. Forecast modeling of, I will also talk about a little bit on forecast modeling of a complex system that I'm intimately familiar with, participated several years ago. And also I'll touch base on what if we get off the chart weather system, and I'll draw that from my own experience in Harris County area. This is the Texas system, part of it. So see, there are a lot of information here, lake level and gauge information. So anybody can access this information from anywhere on the world. All they have to do is go to Texas Flood and draw the information and lake levels and the gauge data. I know we are not there yet, but I think there needs to be some kind of vision or look forward to get there in terms of data generation and disseminating to the public. These are the lake levels in Texas Flood. Always just recently launched. I mean, usually we exchange information by email. Now anybody can go to the website and really see it. You can see a percentage in the flood pool, which lakes are. Let me point here. So you see the legend here. It will tell you whether the lakes are in the flood pool or what percentage of their capacity is really reached. If you click one of the gauge station, you get live information. Dr. Asafa mentioned that. I mean, if you collect information here in the US, I mean, it's public information. Anybody, even in the world, can access it or request it and do whatever they want to do with it. So it's not really a top secret information. So knowing this information really help everybody to manage their system. Let me talk about our complex system. I mean, this is one of the area I worked with in the past. There are the Terran Regional Water District, Dallas-Fort Worth area here. There are 2 lakes here on the east side, and there are other 2 reservoirs here in their system. There is another flood control reservoir here, really managed by the Army Corps of Engineers. Also, there is a pipeline. Their function is raw water supply. So they have a complex system. Do I pump water now to avoid high electric charge? Because during summer, electric charge is very high. So they want to pump water from East Texas and store it in this lake and send it to their customers, their wholesale customers, I mean, Fort Worth and Dallas, Fort Worth area. They develop a very complex system prediction. So if you pump water early and store it in this reservoir, this is a flood control reservoir, so you might occupy space and you might be asked to release it if really a very wet season comes and try to fill that reservoir. So they develop a complex system of really predicting and using in their operation. I just want to highlight what has been done, and this kind of operation can be really done in the Nile system. In the Nile, we have rainfall prediction. Can we use, I mean, this prediction? In terms of climate prediction, I think if we forecast a month or 2 months ahead, what kind of flow could be generated based on this rainfall amount. This is from August to September. So that's something that could be used in the reservoir operation system. In terms of data, this is a Nile basin. I know we need to have gauge information, dry location, and also really data quality. The location needs to be really very informative in terms of decision-making system, and we need to really have a good idea which really watershed really have really significant impacts in terms of decision-making process. Let me go one more ahead and show you the Eastern area, which is I live for the past 20 plus years. And what if we get, I mean, off the chart weather system? Do we blame the facility? Do we blame the operator, or do we blame each other? And Wossenu mentioned legally binding agreement, or do we stick to that one? This is the Eastern area. This is, there are 2 reservoirs. These are flood control reservoirs, Addicks and Barker. They are on the west part of the city. They were built in 1937 and 35. And this is downtown Houston. Houston was very small at the time, only here. So these reservoirs are built to protect them in downtown Houston. So there are gates here at this location, They were initially not gated, but later on gates were added to control the flow and really release it very slowly. The Army Corps of Engineers operates these 2 reservoirs. So when the forecast calls for rainfall amount here in this area, they just shut down those 2 gates and they don't release until such time they can release it, I mean, slowly. But during Harvey, this is what the gate look like. I mean, this is under construction, and this used to be the old gate. I mean, they just close the gates when impending flow. And they are really doing some modification on the gate. So this is what Barker Reservoir. So this is a close-up view of the same system. During Harvey, we got a lot of rainfall in the eastern area. So the reservoir was full. Not only that, some of the houses behind the reservoir got flooded because these houses were built in the permanent pool of the reservoir because they could not prevent it. It was private land. The federal government owns part of the land, and the rest was private property at the time. And also these are clay core earth dams, so they were afraid the safety of the reservoir, so they start releasing water against their policy, and a lot of houses got flooded. And sometimes you have to really adjust to your operation and really manage your reservoir system. Is there a binding agreement, and do you blame the system? Do you blame the weather, or do you blame the facility itself? So in light of accusation going on between the 2 countries, it will be very difficult to implement this kind of policies. Trust needs to be built first. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Alem. Yes, that's very important. Trust has to be built first before you go forward. So we'll talk about that. But now, last but not least, our Kevin. Kevin?
Okay, let's see here. I'll share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And are you looking at my
Yeah.
full screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about data exchange for reservoir planning and operations. Some of this will be repeated. It was nice to see work on the Tarrant Regional Water District. I worked on that for a long time as well in Texas. I like to think of data in three different frames. So looking backwards, data for long-term planning efforts, midterm planning, but basically gathering historical data to be able to make smart decisions moving forward. Data real time for understanding what the current state of the system is, decide on any immediate actions that are necessary, and assess the status of safety for a system as well. And then looking forward, forecasts for near-term operations or sometimes midterm operations, and very important for the multi-reservoir planning and coordination, having an idea how much money or how much water is going to be coming out of a reservoir and into the next reservoir into the future is absolutely critical. So these three different things I think are very important components. It's been a lot going on in the Colorado River, so I'm just going to mention that really quick. That's where my focus has been over the last several months. In terms of historical data, as we mentioned, gauges are available all over the U.S. And some in Mexico as well. These data is publicly available by law from the USGS or Bureau of Reclamation and the states, and they provide all this historical data for anybody to download. So it's all made publicly available. Also, the Colorado River Basin Forecast Center provides real-time information, what the status of different gauges are, as well as status of different reservoirs. And again, all this information is made publicly available and is essentially instantaneous. They also provide forecasts, and this is very critical information, an understanding of how much water we think is going to come into the reservoirs, the large reservoirs of Lake Powell and Lake Mead, are primarily into Lake Powell. So the Bureau of Reclamation and the states and Mexico can make smart water planning decisions. So having a common understanding to the best of science's ability of how much water we think is going to come in the coming season. So very, very critical piece in terms of data exchange and information. And that allows things like this, a 24-month study, which this is representing the pool elevations of Lake Powell. And as everybody knows or might have heard, the reservoir levels in the Colorado system are dropping to unprecedented low levels right now, and requires very, very careful planning of all the water users throughout the basin and strategic cutbacks in their usage. But that is completely dependent upon these forecasts coming in a very transparent way. So as the reservoir levels fall down, the lower basin states are required to cut their usage back. And they conduct these studies, these forecasting studies, every month continuously, and they project out to 24 months in advance of how far we think the reservoir levels are going to be. And as you can see back here, we have a high, sort of a most probable, a minimum probable, or the most likely, and the maximum and the minimum probable hydrologies represented by the blue line, the green line, and the red line. So yeah, and it's done continuously, and then information is provided to stakeholders throughout the basin. And then finally, the daily operation plans, and this is certainly one of the most critical elements. Ideas of how much water would be released daily from the reservoirs, and even down hourly releases by the hydrogeneration desks. Projections, I think it's around 10 days in advance. And then these are updated daily, regularly, how much water we think they're going to release downstream. I mean, this is common in any reservoir across the world, where you really need to have an idea for the downstream communities, for all the activities that are going downstream, how much water is going to be released, also just for sheer safety. And this has to be done, updated regularly for a certain time frame in advance. So when you go down to the border between US and Mexico, there's a joint monitoring system for data sharing. And this is, the border is managed by the International Boundary and Water Commission. So as people may know, there's two different rivers that cross the two countries, the Colorado River and the Rio Grande or Bravo River, Rio Bravo, they call it in Mexico. I focused a lot on the Colorado River. So there's an annual operation plan. Mexico presents through the IBWC, the International Boundary and Water Commission, the annual schedule of requested deliveries by months. And then Mexico will also submit a weekly schedule of deliveries by day within the monthly amounts that are scheduled. The Bureau of Reclamation makes releases as necessary from the United States storage reservoirs to fulfill the delivery schedule for Mexico. So a lot of coordination in between those two. And then the deliveries, after they've happened, they're jointly monitored by the International Boundary Water Commission, which is a combination of the two governments, to ensure compliance with the treaty allotments and schedules. So on the stream gauging, it's put into law. The commission shall construct, operate, and maintain all the necessary gauging stations and other measuring devices for the purpose of keeping a complete record for the waters delivered to Mexico and of the flows of the river. That's part of the treaty between the countries, and a very, very critical piece. And both countries have access to that information. The IBWC jointly operates 6 gauging stations along the river. The US operates 5 gauging stations for the treaty specifically. The field data is collected and jointly compiled and reviewed by the International Boundary and Water Commission. And records of the flows reaching the Mexican points of diversion are published annually in bulletins, both in English and in Spanish. So just a quick little framework of 2 countries working together. So both countries collecting their raw data in their own gauges and cleaning that data into something more usable. There's always errors and issues and problems with gauges, but going through a scientific process to clean that, and then exchanging both that raw data and exchanging that clean data. And all of this information getting poured into a joint science commission that's an apolitical, that's simply trying to understand how much water there was flowing in the rivers. Verify the methods that are used to clean the data and the calculations, the rating curves, et cetera, to assure that the data is of good quality. Compare that with satellite data and produce periodic reports of what the actual flows are believed to be. Now with that, with those flows, developing naturalized hydrologic data sets, both historical as well as integrating any forecasting in to be able to make predictions of what's coming in the near future. And from there, this information we passed into a joint commission river model, or if the countries have their own individual models, the same information can be used in those individual models. So just a framework for processing these data. So the needs for the Nile, transparency of the historical hydrology. This is an absolute critical thing to be able to have, and it's not and should not be a political issue how much water actually has been in the Nile in the past. A shared understanding of what the historical and current demands are is another critical element, just trying to have a good understanding of what has gone on, regardless of questions of rights, regardless of questions of how much water people are going to use in the future, just sheer knowledge of how much water has been existent, how much water has been used in the past. And 3 different major pieces to develop a common forecasted inflow. Now, we know that all of the plans for the GERD, all the operation conversation revolves around a critical piece, knowing what the inflow is into the GERD, whether that's depleted or not depleted or natural or however, but having a common understanding of what the forecast is for the forthcoming year. And that's a very challenging task. And if everybody's trying to do different types of forecasts, we're obviously going to have different results. So there's a very strong need to have a common understanding of what the forecast is going to be, because that is what decides how much water would be released from the reservoir or retained in the reservoir. Development of annual operation plans from that information. Obviously, it would need to be common. And then very critically, a continuous, I would say a 10-day operation plan, both on an hourly basis and a daily basis, and updated every day of how much water is planned to be released downstream. So particularly Sudan can plan well for their operations. These are the three things that I would argue are critical pieces for moving forward on the Nile, and I'll be happy to engage in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That was very enlightening. And okay, now we open the floor for comments, questions, and you can raise your hand. I can see it, or maybe you can send me the chat through Zoom, and then we can go from there. I'm not sure if Dr. Abdulkarim is still here. I think he will be joining us in about 5 minutes or so, because he worked as the regional director for DSS. He might have some information to actually share with us. Okay, any questions? Okay, Abata.
Thank you for the opportunity. And first, I would like to thank Dr. Asafa for organizing this forum. It's very important. And for the presenters also, all four of you. For the sake of saving time, I will not call your names, but all of you. And I remember reading sometimes back about an Egyptian, a senior Egyptian journalist or media person who said that the error from the Egyptian side is that Egypt historically, through a series of governments that took power there, considered Ethiopia as an enemy instead of a partner. So there is this historical aspect of mistrust and a challenge there from the influences of the political side of the use of the Nile River. Here in the presentations, I see from the professionals, from four of you, showing the importance of data sharing. And in the last presentation, Kevin said that even the historical data that is available, mostly it will be in the Egyptian and Sudanese side. I don't think the Ethiopian side has that much data available historically. I'm not saying that they don't have. So in all these three countries, especially, and I don't know about the rest of the 11 Nile Basin countries, the availability of the historical data. And on top of that, in data collection, that there is always uncertainty. The measurements have uncertainties also. So how can you really bring this difficulties and see them and have a solution here? What do you suggest in the making it realistic in what you are suggesting here? That's my question.
Okay, let's collect a couple of questions more, and then we will ask the panel members to respond to that. Any other questions? Yeah, Abtamu. Abtamu. Okay, you lowered your hand. There is a question from chat from Dr. Theodros. It's for Kevin. Would it be practical to recommend a daily flow forecast based for GERD operations? That maybe take into account that information. And then any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay, Candace. Okay.
So my question is for Mohammed. What is the data collection and the methodology you used for the simulations?
Okay. Okay, Rehab.
Yes, thank you for the presentations. I would like to ask about the chance of having the scenario of sharing data, but not having an agreement, which is, I think we are heading to. So what would be the consequences of having this scenario? Thank you.
That's very important and very practical, and that's what we see now. Yeah, even though they disagree to work together, but things are happening. Filling is happening, operation is going to happen, and data sharing will be an important part of that. But it's not happening. So what are the consequences for that? Yeah, I think let's now maybe invite panel members. I mean, take whatever questions you would like to pick and respond to that. Of course, there are some specific questions for Kevin and Mohammed to respond to.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
So there was a question about a daily forecasting for the GERD. When you get down to that time schedule or time resolution of daily, we can get a pretty good idea. The hydrologist can predict more or less how much water might be coming in the next couple of days. But more importantly, it's a question of releases from the reservoir. The reservoir operators will have a general idea how much energy is going to be demanded over the next several days if the grid is being operated well. So there can be a certain level of certainty of how much the turbines will need to turn during that time and make releases. So it's not as much of a hydrology question as it is a management question. Certainly there's always some level of error in there, and you have to accept the fact that the reservoir operators might not get it right of how much they will need to release, but certainly putting a schedule out there, a daily schedule out there of what they intend to release hour by hour is critical, and making that an official report that's passed to the Sudanese government so they know what to expect, and to the dam operators of the Rosaires Dam on what to expect over the next coming days. That's a very critical piece, and that's something that's driven by the general organization and management of the hydropower sector for the GERD. And if they're operating in a sophisticated way, they would be able to know how much water they expect to release to meet their hydropower demands. Typically what happens in most reservoir systems is there's a planned water release for a large period of time, like a month. And then the hydropower operators sculpt that into hourly operations or daily operations and down to hourly operations. As it goes to more finer resolution, then it moves from the water supply focus to the hydropower focus. But in general, once you have an idea how much volume needs to be passed for a period of time, then it can be scheduled. And of course, there may be deviations to that schedule, which has to be accepted, but a plan has to be put forward so the reservoir downstream can plan on that. I'll go ahead and pass on to others to address some of the other questions.
Okay. I'm not sure if you would like to respond, Kevin, or maybe others, to Rehab's questions, which is about the scenarios of about not sharing, they're not agreeing, but still there is a need for shared data. What type of scenarios would work to somehow materialize this? The issue here is we don't have a type of commission like that of US and Mexico that can work together. Here we are in a position that we are not agreeing on even using the non-consumptive use dams like GERD, but also things are happening. And there is indeed a continuous exchange of data and informations in order to actually avoid maybe sometimes catastrophic disasters in some cases, unless you really coordinate all this information is about filling, operations, and also flow data and other things. So what type of scenario would this work now for these three basin countries when they don't agree on the very basic principles of water sharing, water right, and also using non-consumptive projects like GERD, but at the same time, things happening little by little.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Wossenu.
All right. Mostly the GERD operation affects Ethiopia and Sudan. So Ethiopia's proposal was to get contact engineers from both countries to share information. And the response from Sudan was, there is nothing that we don't know. And it got flooded the last 2 years. And definitely this year, water management, reservoir management decisions in the Sudan was a cause, other than getting actually what Ethiopia is doing. And when it's going to stop filling, use that information to delicately manage the small dams. So one way without transboundary agency like NBI or cooperative agreement, the simplest way would be to have representative water manager engineers, especially Sudan and Ethiopia should continuously exchange information. And that will help Sudan operate its water management system more efficiently. And Egypt can share the information too. If there is no big climatic, either too wet, too dry, doesn't affect very much Egyptian dam.
Okay, maybe later on I'm going to invite Dr. Balata to comment on this. What has been said about this data sharing information exchange. He's part of the technical team of the negotiations. So later, maybe first Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I would like to take on a few of the questions. Actually, I'll start with the question from Dr. Abata. I'm not sure if I agree with the characterization of the the relation between Egypt and Ethiopia. I don't think there's any declared enemy relationship between the two countries. There has been disagreements over some issues, but I don't think that mounts to being an enemy. But on your question about whether there's data available in other countries like Ethiopia and other Upper Nile Basin countries that could be shared with downstream countries, and you mentioned that there's very little data. I think there's a lot of data. Data sharing shouldn't be limited to quantities of water. There are other factors that need to be monitored as well, like watershed management, how deforestation is going on, how is that impacting the quality of water, water quality as well. So there are quite a lot of aspects that could be managed together, and a lot of data that could be collected and shared. And I agree with you, there are uncertainties in data measurement, and these need to be updated over time with technology, updating all measurement gauges and so on. And now the question from Candace, thank you very much for that. So in my own work, the way I do it is I contact authorities that currently own the data and try to obtain the data from there. That's when it comes to historical data, but there's also data about projections, and if you want to simulate climate change, then we have to look at climate projections and then simulate that and look at how that impacts river flows. So there are quite a few different methods there. And then lastly, to Rehab's question, what I want to say here is that I think what we're doing now, I think in the three countries, we're learning the hard way. And I'm not sure if I agree with Dr. Wossenu when he said Sudan said nothing. There's nothing that they don't know. I think there's a lot that they didn't know, and that was reflected in the way they managed the system last year. So what happened last year is that there's a lot of water that has been kept in the reservoirs to prepare for 13.5 billion cubic meter filling of the GERD, which didn't reach that volume. Then in the end, they ended up with a lot of water volume that they needed to release at the end of the filling process. So there's a lot that they didn't know, and that resulted in socioeconomic impacts, actually. And I think here we're learning the hard way that data sharing is very important, and it has consequences, and we need to take it seriously and try to develop frameworks that enable the different countries to access data and to start, and to stop looking at data as a property, rather like a public good, as has been presented by the other speakers.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. Dr. Balata, do you want to respond to maybe a question? Is there any arrangement or any talk or any discussions about data sharing? I know it has been there always, whether it's an NBI or Cooperative Framework Agreement or Declaration of Principles. You know, the data sharing is there always. In any transboundary water management discussions, it is always there, but it is not happening. It's not going to a level where it has to be. And we do reach to a point where we really are going to actually feel for that failure. So what I'm going to ask Dr. Balata, who is also a member of the technical negotiation team on the Ethiopian side, is was there any discussions on data sharing or any arrangement along that line? Balata?
Yes, you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. I think it is a good agenda which is discussing here. Basically, yes, whenever we have any transboundary issues, we have to discuss about the data sharing. As you, Professor Asafa mentioned, it was one of the critical article on the discussion and the negotiations. Basically, two things are limited. That discussion basic on everybody agree with the data sharing, particularly the Ethiopian and the Sudan side are thinking it is necessary for this data sharing. But two things are challenging on the data sharing. The one is what it is Dr. Alem mentioned is the trust. Basically, one of the challenge which is not making practical for the data sharing is the trust among the three countries. Which is able to manage, that trust was initiated from the status quo. That is already, everyone is clearly known. The second one is reciprocity, because commonly when we see from the NBI side, commonly when we see from the different previous experience, Ethiopia is wisely shared whatever available data set, whatever the quality, whatever the things are that, but the only country which is providing whatever available data sets in the NBI database is Ethiopia. But whenever we are asking the downstream countries, particularly Egypt, they didn't want to deliver any data for the countries. That is really, the reciprocity is really very, very challenging. Even whenever discussion on the negotiation, they said it's never happened to reciprocally share the data. That is clearly have to understand for the technical teams to share that. Whenever we have a transboundary water resource, the data sharing and information sharing has to be reciprocally in both directions. It's not only from one side, it's not only from the requested from the Ethiopian side. The second point I wanted to add is the one which is mentioned with Dr. Wossenu and Mohammed. Yes, Ethiopia is requesting both countries to assign the dam operators or focal persons to sharing data through the time of filling. But since they know it, it is happened, and they know it also. What is the level of filling, because they are already discussing in number of time. So they are not interested much to do that. Rather, they want to hostage that for the negotiation process. That was the challenge. It has happened. But if they are assigning a data operators or a focal point to sharing informations, still it is open for, particularly when we thinking the filling time in the period. For the continuous and the operation period, that will be settled through the negotiation agenda. I think the third point maybe I want to mention is the time scale for the data sharing, because the three countries requiring data for different purposes. Yes, Rosaris and GERD has very near areas. They may need operational data set, like daily data set something, or even sub-daily characteristics. But when we think for GERD and had or Egypt, it doesn't requiring for such operational data set. So the time scale with the monthly data set is possibly sufficient enough to share because that is purposeful for the planning and water resource management. Those are the ideas we have to addressing from the technical point of view. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Balata. Now we have our co-moderator joining us, Dr. Abdulkarim Said. Thank you very much for coming. He's just coming from another meeting. And as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Abdulkarim has been instrumental in the Nile Basin, in the NBI operations. He has led different regional projects, and also he was director for the DSS program, the System for System. Now he left NBI, and now I believe maybe Abdulkarim, you can correct me. He's a regional director for International Water Management Institute in Addis. Maybe, or if it has the same mandate, it looks into the Nile Basin countries. So Abdulkarim he is the one who knows about the data issue. He doesn't know about the politics of data, but he knows from the technical perspective. So Abdulkarim, maybe you can comment on maybe on the last point that Dr. Balata also looked about it.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, sorry for late joining you because I had another meeting until 4 o'clock. So yeah, I have heard, I think, Mohammed Bashir speaking when I joined. And hi, Mohammed. I think we met in Manchester 2 years ago, probably. And also I heard Dr. Balata speaking as well. Thank you very much for this. This is I think it's a very important topic, especially when it comes to transboundary water resource management. Yeah, the significance of data and information sharing and exchange in transboundary water resource management cannot be really overstated. So I will share with you part of my experience in the past, at least. Yeah, I used to work for NBI for nearly 17 years, from 2004 up to 2021, actually. Then I joined UMI, the International Water Management Institute, since March 2021. I'm the country rep for Ethiopia and then the regional rep for Eastern Africa of UMI. So just commenting, maybe reflecting rather, not really commenting on what people have said, but commenting, reflecting on the past experience. Of course, within NBI, also data sharing was really a big agenda, as you can imagine. So when I was working for NBI at that time, we distinguished between data sharing and exchange. So technically what it means really is when it's exchange, it's more reciprocal exchange between countries. So one country gives data to another, and then another country also, whatever the other country needs. That's what we call it, more of exchange. When it says sharing, then it's more like countries like make data available to NBI for activities that they are also working together. That is slightly different. Just to give you a little bit of background, I was at the time 2006 up to 2009, no, 2007, 2009, I was in charge of preparing the NBI interim procedure for data sharing and exchange at that time. So what really worked at that time was we focused primarily on the specific projects the countries working together, because there was some argument at that time. Some countries were saying we are still negotiating the cooperative framework agreements, the CFA, which has specific clause on data sharing, or they call it data sharing protocol. So at that time, 2007, 2008, the CFA was still under negotiation. So some countries were not ready actually to go into a full-fledged protocol on data sharing. So this is more, you can say, the political side of it. But at the same time, what really worked at that time was, so the argument was, look, you are working on projects, there are a number of technical projects, the countries working together, which cannot work without data, obviously. So countries were working on flood preparedness projects, on the Nile decision support system, or watershed management, or irrigation development. There are many, many projects. Countries were cooperating technically at that time, so data was important. And that's really what convinced the countries, yes, these are projects we are working together, so we have to make data available. So it's more the sharing side. What happens really is countries share data with NBI, data needed for specific projects, and then that data was part of the study, part of the reports, or part of the modeling database, for example, and then which was made available to all countries. So this is really what has been working in NBI. I think it's still the same. So two things here. One is being very specific. I remember the reflection of some countries where we cannot simply go into data sharing blindly without any specific purpose. So the purpose was very important at that time. So we made it really purpose specific. And if you see the interim procedure, the objective really was scoped to say to implement NBI programs or projects. So that's really worked. And as okay, Dr. Bellet alluded to it, up until 2010, Egypt was still participating actively in NBI technical level, but since 2010, as many of you know, Egypt has frozen its participation. Initially Sudan and Egypt, but later on Sudan joined, I think in 2012. So up at that time, well, maybe the volume of data might change, but NBI was getting data from nearly all countries at that time. So that was really very good. I mean, now going forward, still NBI gets data from countries. The volume, the type, the flow, the speed might change from country to country. But by and large, NBI still depends really on data shared by member states, because any reports that NBI generates, the countries have to validate it. That's very important because it is a little bit politically involved process. And for the countries to validate, they have to review the report. And then when they review the report, if the data that is presented in the report is not correct, then of course they have to provide the data. Otherwise, you know, if they don't have the data, of course, NBI can look for either generate some information or from other sources, global sources, whatever is available. But for data which is available at the country level, usually countries agree to give it because they don't want that report to come out with wrong, for example, incorrect information about their respective countries. So that has worked, and I think, but more recently, of course, Dr. Bellet also tried to allude to it. I haven't heard what other colleagues, participants have said. Here comes the political side of it, which I'm not really very much conversant, but I understand what it is you know, because of other political issues in other arenas, then countries become a little bit not very comfortable to share data. So the principle, what Dr. Bellet said, reciprocity between countries, for example, but this is not really openly articulated in NBI forum, as far as I understand, at least until I left NBI. So now, more reflecting on that, so we are talking about specific purposes, because there are some purposes like disaster preparedness or disaster mitigation, for example. It's a lot humanitarian. And I think many countries, I believe, tend to agree that they really need to cooperate on that. And then data sharing could be part of the cooperation. The question is now, how can the scientific community help countries pass the political or legal, whatever obstacle you think of in data sharing? I think that is because the way I think, and the way sometimes I also operate, is that when the countries have positions, then I take that as given. So it's very difficult to change. As technical people, it's very difficult to change that because countries have their own reason why they have that position. And the question is now, as a technical community, how can we help countries actually still cooperate, make data available, or help them exchange some kind of data or share some kind of data to address specific problems, like, for example, disaster preparedness or flood disaster preparedness? I think I can see the scientific community can have a big role in helping that. For example, making data more, available from like Earth observation information or other like globally available data sets, which could be may not replace completely the ground observations, but at least help countries to understand, on specific areas, there are also alternatives which they can use actually to address specific problems. I'll stop here, but if people want me to clarify on specific items from what I've said, I'll be very happy. But thank you very much, Professor Barlessa, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Abdulkarim, for the very insightful comment and reflection from your experience. Yes, I personally don't expect, every details of data would be exchanged and shared among the 3 basin countries. Maybe it might take some time because there are other things to happen first, build trust first, and then agree on some other things. But yes, the question is, how can we do, the scientific community like us do? Maybe we can provide large-scale data sets, from satellites and also from other data sets that synthesize it and analyze it, can be available at a larger scale. But as Dr. Abdulkarim says, that may not replace the types of data and information that the basin countries need in order to actually manage their water resources. With that, now let me go to Sahar. Sahar, you have a question?
Yeah, Dr. Asaf, can I touch a few points Dr. Walter raised? I don't think they were addressed in terms of data quality and things like that. Is
okay.
All right?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we are focusing on data sharing. I think a lot has been said. That's very, very important. Data quality and data collection itself by each country is really as important as sharing. We only share data we have it. And that data has to be really very, in terms of quality and also the right location. I think, first of all, we have to really understand the importance of data, institutionally, personally, technically. Each institution in each country should really understand that data quality and really very important. And institutional building is really part of it. The other thing is funding. It needs to be funded. It needs to go through quality control. We know here in the West what needs to be done in terms of, funding, training, good engineers that really care about the data. It's not just a number. It needs to reflect the actual reality. It needs to be verified. It needs to be maintained, the instruments out there in the field. Somebody has to really go there and check them, periodically to make sure what you are really collecting is not garbage. So that's really very, very important. The funding part, the institutional mechanism, and the training of really well trained people to collect data. So in terms of data exchange, I want somebody to comment in terms of exchange. Do you exchange an operator level, or do you exchange on the higher country-to-country institutional level? By the time the data or the decision trickles down to the operator level, it might take weeks. So that also really a very, very important aspect, because the operator in Sudan should communicate with the operator in Ethiopia on certain levels, and some higher decision making also needs to be communicated on a higher level. But that hierarchy needs to be also established. I just want to comment on those two things. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Alem. Yes, I agree with you. You see, like the type of international boundary water commission that US and Mexico had would actually somehow take all the data, synthesize information, discuss among the basin countries, so they have a consensus on what type of information that they can actually generate. Data is data. Unless you really convert it into an information, it's a raw data. If you give the same data set for the 3 basin countries, they might end up having different information, depending on how they look at it, depending how they analyze it. And that's not very important. And again, the dispute comes out of that. This is what I get, this is what I get. But an information exchange is very important. And that can be done, of course, with a very good allocated resources, and also a joint commission that works together. I had a chance to visit the Itaipu Dam in Brazil and Paraguay, maybe the second largest dam. And in every office you go, you find 2 people, one from Brazil, one from Paraguay. In every office, it can be a janitor office, it can be a pump operating office, it can be anywhere else. So you can see how the level of trust was there and how they can work together, the same river that they share. Here we are a long way to go in terms of bringing the basin countries together, even to agree on a very fundamental issues. So yes, it is very important. It is timely, but still there are other things that need to be addressed first. Yeah, Sahar, I would like to give you an opportunity for you to ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Maybe my question already is answered, but I was talking about. I'm very interested about all the presentation. Very good presentation. I'm very happy to talk about the data sharing. It's very important, these issues. But how to can convince the relevant authorities about this data? I will take a time to convince this all the three countries to make this. My question: you have you start any plan about this, or just this proposal about the data sharing? Thank you.
Okay, let me add also Dr. Almasu, and then maybe we can respond to that as well. Dr. Almasu, have a question?
Thank you for the chance given. First, I would like to appreciate your contributions, yourself, Wossenu, Mohammed, Kevin, Alem, and Abdulkarim. And it's quite very useful that you give us your opinions. And I like the tradition, it has to keep on. My comment is on data. Data, I think, when I say data, hydrometeorological data, socioeconomic data, geographic data, and so on, as far as it is at the exchange level, that wouldn't be a problem, because even though it's not, it is something difficult to be seen as something normal by some parties of the negotiators, sooner or later, they will realize that it doesn't mean anything. But the sticky point is not the actual data. The key point is actually on planned situations. What's going to happen? What is going to be done in the future? So that is a sticky point, especially in the absence of any, at least low-level cooperational agreement type of thing. It's very difficult, and trust cannot be built in that direction. So I hope that will not be a long time phenomena. It will be solved, but it's not as easy as exchanging the data types that I've already mentioned. So I make a distinction between a planned type of information and existing collected and processed data type of thing. So that is what I want to comment on.
Okay.
Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Almasu. Dr. Lemma?
Did you call my name, Lemma?
Yes, you raised your hand, yeah. Yes,
I did. Thanks for the opportunity. And I really appreciate the input of all the presenters today. Earlier, I was very fearful we may not get to understand the data in so many different aspects because the academic can talk from a research point of view or the detail of analysis that's required. And then the practitioner can say, I have to have data, therefore it must be provided. But then it also came through the presentation, say, from what Dr. Alem showed us in his area of experience and the type of data that's available around Houston, the nature of the availability and the kind of expectation he has based on his experience was quite different from, say, what Dr. Wheeler was showing us based on the Colorado, the Hoover Dam and the agency requirements, and in the two countries. But then integrating the two and reflecting my own experience, I practiced engineering on practical level as well as large scale here in California, managing the hydro resources of Pacific Gas and Electric Company. And we use data heavily. And the data comes from public source. And I stress when I say public, that's what Dr. Alem was really exposed to and experienced in, and he expects data to be available, funded by the public. The public funding makes that availability possible, but you go from flood control type purposes, which the Corps of Engineers and the public funded by taxpayer money makes available vis-a-vis the Bureau of Reclamation data or the USGS data. And as I speak this to some of you, the details and the relevance may not appear as clearly different as I see it, but they are different because of those differences. And then also the experience where we are in water resources development is relevant. Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, where are they? The upstream countries that are not even there. And when the Nile Basin Initiative experience was reflected and explained by Dr. Abdulrahman, I'm not sure I pronounce your name right, but that also gave us insight. And that was where I personally was hoping there could be basis for putting this on, bringing data requirement and application on the ground until we have that common exchange, common purpose. Purpose drives what we do. And that was the hope that could have brought the data exchange, the data collection, the type of data, even at a macro level, and then we can work the details further into the existence. But I haven't heard anybody either referring to or saying how we operate the GERD. Nobody knows. Nobody knows, and I stress, nobody knows the demand side of the GERD, how that is going to be. Just to give you a hint on what may change is hydro development is really a load shaping generation. It is not simply an average release over the year. You take a variable flow and you release it in a uniform fashion, which is repeated on this forum by many people. I do not expect that. Initially, it could be close to that, but the demand that the GERD would be satisfying has not been shaped and will not be shaped for a long time. And until that happens, the data is not going to be reflected. And until that happens, the proper data collection will not come into the ground. However, being the academicians and highly technical people that we are, we have to stay engaged. We have to stay engaged in order to help our country develop the proper data network and proper work, and also keep up the pace. That is very, very important. While we will not get what we need right away, helping it develop should be taken as a task by us, and the patience and the experience and the trial and error. We have to be able to provide that. And if I made that point, I would have been the happiest guy on earth if everybody sees that. Thanks a lot, Dr. Asaf. I took a little bit more time than I should, but apologize.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lemma. Now I'll give opportunity for our co-moderator, Dr. Abdulkarim, and then followed by Dr. Balata.
Thank you, Professor Asaf. I just wanted to reflect on what Dr. Admasu has said. I fully agree with you. When we talk about data, it's not about the historical data or real time only. It's also about the planned projects. Usually in the legal term, they call them planned measures. And that's the most sensitive data to get from countries. So just by way of like sharing the experience of NBI, when I was working there, the NBI had an activity, a study with the title Strategic Water Resources Analysis. And the idea was really to collect country plans from all countries of projects like irrigation projects, hydropower projects, dam projects, and primarily focusing on this, and then put them in the decision support system, the NBI, the Nile decision support system, and project water demand, water availability in the basin. And that was one of the activities NBI used to sensitize countries, how the water demand or the supply and water availability and water demand is going to show, or what is going to look like in the coming 3 decades. I mean, the planning horizon was 2050. And that was really very interesting exercise because countries readily share data. When I say countries, Egypt is not part of it because Egypt is not participating in the NBI. That is the main reason. And that helped NBI to get those planning data, and at the same time to help countries really understand how the basin water supply and demand is going to look like. And they are now going forward from that, and then trying to identify what kind of options they can generate in order to narrow the gap between water supply and demand. Obviously, if you put all the irrigation planned irrigation projects in the model and see the projection of water demand, you see the demand far surpasses the supply of water. So these are avenues which NBI was using or is still using in order to, at the same time, to get the data, but more importantly, to create the understanding of the countries that the joint management of the basin really is absolutely important, not only for the country, but also for the river itself. So because data sharing is not an end by itself, data sharing is to support the cooperative management of the resource. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Abdulkarim. Dr. Balata, briefly, can you comment?
Yes, thank you, Professor Rafa. Just I want to comment on that, the idea of Dr. Alem about the level of data sharing at operator level or at the national level. If we are looking for simple technical workability, still the operator level data are sufficient enough to managing the system. Yes, it is requiring for at country level, at higher level, if there will be agreement among the countries. Otherwise, without agreement, just to managing instance of feeling and process, I think the data sharing at operator level is more operational than the higher level. Just I want to comment that. Thank you.
Okay, now let me maybe ask if the panel members would like to maybe comment on some of the questions and comments actually given.
Yes, I'll make a quick comment on the multiple layers of data sharing. I think it's very important to have the overall agreements between the countries for sharing data, but also the one dam operator has to be able to call up the other dam operator, and that those lines of communication are critical for basic safety, and there has to be the ability for communication of plans on a technical level with a much greater expediency than would be allowed going through a larger political process. So the political processes have to empower and allow dam operators and the technical people to pick up the phone and to talk to each other. Those mechanisms have to be in place long before a dam is, long before these crises are needed. Dr. Abdulkarim talked about some of the more project-based data sharing, and I think someone else in the country in the questions did as well, versus sort of continuous data sharing. And I think that's where a major step change needs to happen, to go from sharing over a particular issue or report or something like that to a more commitment for open continuous. You don't know how the data is going to be used. It could be used in many, many different ways, but to have commitments for getting even the raw data out there and available on a continuous basis in perpetuity is critical to, and even if that's at, I think to be able to get someplace, you have to start prioritizing which locations need to be available all the time from now moving forward, to dam operators, the water resource managers, or to the general public. And this also, I want to emphasize that there's one mindset that you have to agree on everything before you can agree on the pieces or on the data sharing. And I would disagree with that. I think a lot of examples, there's stepping stones. There's first agreements on the data sharing before larger comprehensive agreements can be settled. Obviously, an agreement like the CFA is still going to take a long time to continue, or any larger agreements, but building blocks can be put into place. For example, everyone needs to agree on what a forecast looks like and how a forecast can be done. So small commissions of people can focus on those particular tasks to answer one question. What is the best forecast? What's our ideal, or what is the best science say the forecast is going to be? And that could be a separate agreement that has a limited time duration until larger agreements are put into place, but not wait for a large comprehensive agreement before the building blocks can those building blocks can start much faster than a large agreement can. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Very important.
I have one more comment.
Okay, Wossenu, yeah, go ahead.
I think Sudan has to recognize that the GERD is physically there and it is being filled. So you have to develop new operating guidelines for the dams using the information. And a lot of modeling has to be done to manage the floodplain problem, which the last 2 years, a lot of areas was flooded. So I think there is a lot of hydrologic modeling and reservoir guideline development work for the Sudan. Otherwise, it would be just blaming the GERD for every event that happens there. Thank you.
Exactly. Especially, I mean, in the face of the GERD operation, which is coming in a few months, I think those information should be very, very valuable for particularly Sudan. Especially in wet seasons. I think that has to happen, but it will happen, but it's going to be very slow. But what will be the consequence of not reaching to an agreement of information exchange, data sharing, whatever we call it? In the absence of that, that will be a little bit a challenge. Dr. Abdulkarim, did you raise your hand, or was it from the previous?
It's probably previous time, sorry, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, any other questions and comment?
Yeah, one comment, Dr.
Okay, Alem, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's very important to recognize the contribution of all the academics interested in the Nile Basin and independent modelers and researchers to the knowledge pool. By really holding the data, you are hindering that really contribution, really. Whatever's data is out there should be really available. You don't do any harm, even if the data is used negatively to attack or to construct some negative aspect. Somebody will look at that analysis and debunk it. Really, by holding the available data, probably do more harm in my opinion, than really if you release it, because that will be available, looked at by different people. Somebody might really want to make his own point and try to do tweak the data, but some other person also might look the same data and really put out his own opinion to debunk that analysis. So by holding the data, really, there is more harm done than really by releasing it, in my opinion. It's just not security sensitive information. Just you are really releasing the flow data to confirm either model simulation or some other analysis done. So that's my comment, in my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mohammed, you have a question through chat. Did you get it?
Yes, I got that one.
Okay. So the question is from Sahar, the impact of GERD on the floods for Sudan. Based on your information, does it make better water management?
Yes. So first, I want to clarify that in the past 2 years, the GERD really didn't have any impact on floods in Sudan. So it didn't cause any floods, and it didn't prevent the floods, because when the water reaches the level of the middle wall, then water will start flowing, and that's just natural flow going into Sudan. Of course, the GERD will have an impact on riverine flood management in Sudan. It will reduce the occurrence of floods. But there's also need for careful management when the GERD is at a high level, because that reduction in flood occurrence will have a complex interplay, complex impact on the interplay between flood risk, hazard, and vulnerability that need to be handled carefully. But the short answer to your question is the hazard is going to be reduced.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll take two more and then we can actually close this. Abate?
Yes, thank you very much. Here, I have to bring this as a suggestion. And why I say that is from Kevin's sharing. I think that's a very important point there. And we should not wait for a comprehensive, full, complete agreement before sharing some information. So, and also Alem's suggestions as well. I suggest that we have to start from the professional side collaboration here. And then reaching to the people, of course. But from the professional side, why do I say that is, for example, if Alem and Mohammed Bashir or Kevin, Dr. Wossenu, or two of from different places write some paper, for example, in a journal with the data that is available for them, and also promote the collaborative advantage here, that will be very important, instead of waiting for the political guys to come together and come with some kind of agreement. So I really strongly suggest that this collaborative work among the professionals should be focused on. For example, there was recently from the University of South Carolina, California, that a paper which I think, sorry if I use a strong word, is not science-based. It's pseudo, in my opinion. And actually, it's against what I heard Kevin said, for example, and I sent a note to him. And in that aspect, for example, you can come and work with Egyptian professional to address that kind of wrong communication, which is not technically sound and scientifically also really not up to the mark. So this kind of professional collaboration should be encouraged, and I suggest that you do that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Abate. Yes, I agree with you. I mean, these types of efforts are there, but maybe in a very fragmented way. I know a couple of cases where there was publications that was not true, that was misleading, and which was actually a rebuttal was actually published into that. I think we have to continue and of course provide accurate information for the basin countries. And one of the most important feature of this forum is to actually provide good science and data, and then how can we actually somehow bring the scientific community together. And I agree with you. I mean, we can do a lot of stuff, particularly on large scale data sets. But I think when it comes to operational data set, there is no any other way. The countries has to sit down together, sort out all of those things and exchange this information. I think data is already, you cannot hide any data. I remember, sometimes getting some basins data was really very difficult in Ethiopia. I don't know for whatever reasons they just provide. I think that's not a case anymore. You can get all those informations, and it's very, very important. Again, converting data into information into knowledge is a key thing, but in this process, you can manipulate data, mislead data, and use it for the purpose you want to use it. In order to avoid that, a common commission, a common group of scientists, engineers has to be, forming whether it's a commission or whatever you call it, to work along this line and provide accurate information for the basin countries. This is very, very important, and I think we have to continue to work together. And we'll be very happy to hear a lot more about this in our forum, and then if there is any other platform that you would like to talk about. Any other question or comment? It's now almost 5 to 10 o'clock. I have a class in about half an hour time. But if you have any questions, any comments, let me know. Maybe I can take one more. Otherwise, we can close it from here. Any comment, questions? I would like to thank then the panel members, Kevin, Alem, Wossenu, and Mohammed, for really taking your time and coming and talking to you. And also Abdulkarim, thank you very much again for coming the last 1 hour to be part of this. And all of you, of course, waking up in the morning, staying late in the evening, depending whenever you are. Dr. Lemma actually wakes up around 5 o'clock in the morning. He lives in California, I know that. And a number of you are also, it's already in the evening. And again, thank you very much. And hopefully we will see you in 2 weeks. On September 13, we have another webinar by Magdalene. Thank you very much again. Thanks a lot.
Make it all worth it, Dr. Assafa.